Hi everyone, it's Donelle McAdams with you today. We're going to be doing quite a few different things today, not a real exacting thing, but I wanted to show you how to use a couple of templates that you may not know how to use. And I also want to show you a method of how you can do what we call face a quilt. This would be more for your smaller project, and it's a great way for beginners to do that. So when I actually get to that, I'm actually using a 16-inch sandwich. It doesn't really matter. I just put that down there so that when you go to do it later, you'll be able to figure out how the measurements work. So what I'm going to start out first is by talking about piecing a quilt. And so I'm going to have Megan hand me one of my star centers over there. I need 4 of those. I need 4 of the blues. And I need 1 of my reds. So what I'm going to do is I've already put on the ruler foot, so I'm going to take that off real quick, and I'm going to get my 1/4-inch foot because I want to show you some hints that you may not be aware of. So I've threaded my machine top and bottom with 60 weight thread. And any of the 60 weights will work. You can use 80, 60 top and bottom is good. You can put 80 on the bobbin, 60 on the top. But the whole idea is to get a nice flat square. And I have one finished for you somewhere here. And this is what we're going to be putting together, is this block right here. Now I'm doing a small quilt called Old Glory, and this is what the blocks look like. There's actually strips with it also. But when I get finished, I want to be able to put a design on this that goes out over all of these seams. And so that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about first here today. So I'm going to go ahead and put on my piecing foot. And when I piece, I like to use a smaller stitch length because I'm not going to be doing any back stitching at all. Make sure that foot gets on there and tightened up. And now I'm going to get my stitches. I'm going to use my left needle if you watch it. The reason for that is because this needs to come right into this groove right there. Now this machine has prepared for you to forget about the facts, so they actually put a hole in there, so if you forget, you're not going to damage your foot or break your needle, and so everything would be fine with that. Now I am real quickly going to take out my 90 top stitch needle, and I'm going to put in an 80, and it's an 80 regular. It is not a top stitch needle. Because if you use a top stitch needle, you're going to be leaving some pretty large holes in your fabric, and you don't want that. So what I'm going to do is change that and get my threader here. And now we're ready to go with that. So I'm going to change my stitch length from 2.5 down to about a 2. And now when I guide on the edge of my foot or follow my line here on my grid glider, I'm going to have a 1/4 inch. So this particular design has the red stars in the center, the blue star or the blue solids are out in the corner, and then I must have had an extra one there. So then these these other half square triangles are going to get put in here like so. Now I guess I'm a little less prepared than I thought I was, so you're going to watch me square up my triangles. So I'm going to need my little square up over there. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to use the diagonal. I could use it from the board, but I just prefer to use it just from the ruler. And I'm going to be squaring these up to 3.5, and so I'm showing you more than I really had planned to, but that's good, especially for those of you that are beginners. So this was a half square triangle that was made with a 4-inch square, and we need to get this to 3.5. So you can see very easily over here there's a little extra, and when I'm doing smaller things, I like to use a smaller rotary cutter. So this is not my smallest one. I have one that's actually smaller than this. And I'm going to do these two sides here. And when I do those two sides, I hardly cut off anything, but that's okay because I'm going 180 degrees, and now is when I'm putting this on my 3.5. And you can see why I like this little ruler, because when I turn that, my 3.5 line, there's 1, 2, 3.5. And so you can see this time, with that being on that diagonal, I'm able to just line that up. And I will tell you, when you're cutting, if you stand up, you're going to have a better cut. I don't know why it is, but it makes it so much easier. So now let's do that again. This time, I'm going to line it up here just on that diagonal and cut off just a little sliver. Not really doing anything except using the diagonal. And like I said, that smaller rotary cutter makes a big difference when you're working with small things too. The reason for the big cutters is to go through more layers of fabric. So you can be a little, use the little ones and have just as much accuracy. Now I'm right on that line. I'm going over here. Cut down that side. If I was left-handed, I would be on the other side. So when you're finished with doing these, I got 2 more to go, you should have this right to the corner on each of those, or you're not going to have a block that actually makes a star. So since I'm right-handed, I'm using this going from lower left to upper right, and I'm just laying that on there, so I'm just sliver cutting off. The top and the right side. And you'll notice that I go ahead and take those slivers off before I lift up my ruler. And now, because of the way this ruler is, and I need a 3.5, I'm just lining up that 3.5 on those two sides. Now, another time when it's good to use a smaller rotary cutter like this is when you're cutting any kind of a shape, such as a circle or a half, something that's got a rounded edge. So like some of the, not templates for sewing, but some of the cutting templates have rounded edges, and they're not intended to be used with the larger cutters. So that's another time when you would use a small one. One more. And you'll notice that when I set this template on here, I don't have any issues with the center, that seam being higher or anything like that, because I've used that 60 weight thread. Now, I don't know if any of you have any questions while we're doing this.
They were asking about the pattern and the where to get it, so I have just put 2 links onto the pattern and the kit.
Okay, yes, we've got it as a pattern and we've got it as a kit. You can get it both ways.
So Valerie does have a question with what you're talking about. She wishes her blocks came out too big. She says normally they're slightly small, even though she uses the 1 1/4 scant inch. Any tips on how to cut a little bit more accurately with that?
Okay, in this case, the pattern was written so you would square it up. And you will notice, if you want to hand me another one that's not squared, Megan, you will notice no matter what I do when I'm making this, you can kind of see that this is not, if I lay this on here, this side, I've got it lined up over here, this side is not even. It's narrower down here as far as what is extra there. So if you are making half square triangles, I would encourage you to always make them larger and intend to square them up, because that will make your project look a whole lot better. And that's a great question. Now, the way these half square triangles are are made. Obviously, we're doing the draw the line down the center. There was 2 squares together, drew the line down, and then stitched on 1/4 of an inch away from each of those sides. And I'm going to show you a couple of things real quick before we move on, but I'm going to use that square we just had. So, and this is great, you guys. Ask questions, because that's what I love to have, is questions to answer, because it doesn't mean that we have to have a script for what we're doing here. So let's say we had just cut this one in half, okay? So this was just cut in half, and this was like this. It wasn't pressed or anything. It's always good to set your seam. So like right now it was just cut. I just set that seam because you're pretending with me too, okay? And so I just set that seam, and if you are going to be pressing to the dark, you should be looking at the dark, because what you want to do is lift this up. And this is why I like this little iron, or ones that are like it, is because I just take the nose of that then, and on my wool mat, I'm just pushing that back so that that seam right there doesn't get any little pleats or anything like that. And then I actually press the whole thing nice and flat. And so if you will do that first step, what I call setting the seam, it will make this second step so much better. And so the 1/4 inch seam, yes, that's important, but the pressing is probably even more important. And if you were here and you pulled your fingers like right back across here, you would notice that there's hardly any difference because it's pressed so nice and flat. And the reason for that is because I used that 60 weight thread. So I'm going to move all of this back out of the way for right this minute, and we're going to go back to what our blocks are. So I have, there's just a little bit of difference on these blocks. This is a little whiter on the back where the light is, because this is one of those kind of grunge type fabrics. And so what I do is, this is just one block that we're doing right here. But if I was doing this, and I actually have 6 to do, if I was doing this, I would actually pile them up. Now, I don't know what happened to my 4 that I just cut. There they are. So what I want to do is I want to look at my pattern, and I want to see how do these blocks fit in here before I dive into sewing them together. And so I'm taking this and laying them out. Right now that looks kind of funny. It's like, what in the world is that going to be? And then this one's going to go this way. And then the other one over here is going this way. So the easiest way to think of this, to check it, is in each of the corners, that's where the point of the light triangle goes to. So I've got this laid out correctly, just like that. And I'm going to show you what Eleanor Burns has promoted for years, if you've never seen that. And it really makes it easy to put a block together. So with me putting this over here like this, I've got enough space for me to still sew. So I am going to be taking, almost did it wrong, the second row and putting it over onto the first. And I'm going to take this side right here, and I want to make sure that I get this exactly matched up. So I'm going to use a little wonder clip here, and this looks like, oh, that's not going to be the right size. Well, remember, it's cotton fabric. We're going to make it work because we measured it that way. Now, I like to use the clips for 2 reasons. They're easy to put on, but you should really never, ever, 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 when you're putting a quilt together, sew over a pen. And there's absolutely no way on this earth that I could sew over these wonder clips. So I'm going to put my needle down in there, and I'm going to take this one out, and I'm just going to guide right beside that edge. And you can see I'm lining right along the edge here. Are we close enough for them to see in there?
I can't get much closer.
Okay. So then what I'm going to do is I'm coming over here to my pile, and I'm turning this one over on that one, and I am doing what we call flash fleeting. flash feeding. And so I'm going to take this one and I'm going to get it lined up like it needs to be. I'm going to give it just a little tug there in the middle, and you can see I can close that up. And I'm going to start up here in the corner, and I'm going to put it right up underneath my presser foot there, and when I've caught on with a couple of inches or stitches, I'm going to pull this out, and then I'll just give this just a little bit of a tug, and that's going to lay right in there. And I stop at the edge of that one, and I come over and I lay this one over, and I just have to remember which side is the one that is going to get stitched. And these are the little tiny wonder clips, and something that I'll show you about them here in just a second after I stitch this. So I've got one stitch on there, and I can take this off now. Now that's the end of that block. If I was doing more rows and whatever, I could continue on. But I'm going to cut that one so that now I come back here and I lay this out over in my little pattern, so to speak, and I check it. Do I have it correct? Remember I said those corners get the point and we're good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this row and I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to do the very same thing. I'm going to just match that up and match this up. And here's what I'll show you about these. On the back side, I don't know if you can really see it, but they actually have measurements on there. So if you need to know for some reason when you pin this that you're pinning in a certain measurement, you have lines on the back that you can use that way. So now I'm coming back over here and I'm going to set that down. Using that 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to flip this one back out and come over here and get this one and just lay it on top of it. And you can actually put your rows together of your blocks after you do it. So this is like a 9 patch here. You might have a 9 block quilt. You can do the same concept. And it saves so much time. Anyone out there ever done it this way? Everybody's quiet today.
Well, we did have some questions, but I knew you were going to come up to one of them.
Okay.
Rhonda wants to know, what does setting the seam actually do?
Setting the seam takes that thread and basically meshes it with each other and the fabric. So it's kind of like thinking of taking a potato that's a potato, but you mash it down. You just, everything kind of goes together. It's the same kind of concept. You're just setting that all together so it lays flatter. But that's a great question. But I will tell you, it does make a huge difference. It's a simple, small step, but it makes a huge difference. Now, we're going to check this because we've got it all together. It's never going to come apart again. And I'm going to get my wool mat up here so I can press, but I want you to see what it looks like this way. And I'm going to just take my wool mat and set it up here for you. You remember, the reason I love my little mini iron is because it stays on all the time. So when we're doing this part of it, I'll try to get it out of the way here so we can see it. But when we're doing this part of it, we want to look at this and see, okay, which would be the best way to press. We're either pressing the middle ones to the center and these to the outside, or we're pressing these to the center, this to the outside, and these to the center. Well, because these are solid blocks, that's the way your seam wants to go. So I'm just going to take a second and press that way. That's the setting of it. And then I'm going to inch out that direction. And then I'm going to turn this back, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's just way too many steps. It will save you a lot in the end. So why don't I just go right now, and I'm going to set all my seams. See how fast that went, rather than just one at a time. And I've only got 2 left. And I will set that one and that one. And if you start doing that, you will see a big difference. Now I've already held onto this and pulled that way, so I'm going to hold on to this one, and I'm going to just use the edge of my iron. And I think you can see, these being 3.5-inch blocks, why this is easier to do with a small iron than it would be a great big one. So I'm going to set that one going that way, and I'm going to come down this direction, and I'm going to set this one going that way. And just because it's out of my area, and you probably can't see it either, this one's going to go to the outside, and this one's going to go to the outside also. Now with all of those seams already pressed, then all I'm going to be doing is coming back and laying one of the rows over the other one. And because there's thread there, you can see that little piece of thread, that's where that's going to get matched. And if you have fork pins, this is the perfect use of fork pins. But I don't have any fork pins yet. I've got to get some, and what they are is they're just a U-shaped pen, but they are not like a heavy T-pin in the fact that they're just the same weight as like a straight pen. So I got to get some fork pins myself because they are so nice for this. So I'm going to put my Wonder Clip right at that place, and I'm going to come back over here to the top and get those edges right together and set that underneath my foot and start to stitch. And even though I'm working to that point, I'm still down here looking, is this going to fit together right? And you're seeing that this is sticking out a little bit. I need to pull that off and get right in there and just move that over a smidge. And I want to make sure that that seam lays going up because the under one is down. And when we get down to here, we want to make sure that this one is still going up underneath there.
All right, there's a little bit of confusion for those who don't know. What is a fork pin again? And are you really saying fork like the utensil?
Yeah. I'll draw you a picture here. And I will try and get it on my website right afterwards so that you can see it. But you can see now when I pull this out, I'm lined up right there and I'm lined up right there. And that's the whole idea of this. So now we're going to turn this one under, and it doesn't matter which way we go. I'm going to match this up. So a fork pin has 2 ends to it. And so one would go in one side of the seam and the other would go in the other side of the seam. So when you've got these seams, see this one's going this way and this one's going this way, and we call this nesting. And that's why we press them that way. I'm going to get one more Wonder Clip here. I keep them in a little box here in my drawer. And Megan's got me a piece of paper here. This is what a fork pin would look like. It's like a straight pin that just comes up and rounds around and comes right down back like this. And both of these ends are like straight pin sharp. Now I've magnified that so you can see it, but that's what it looks like, and it allows you to hold both sides of your seam in place. So I'm going to set my foot back down, my needle down. I'm going to stitch just a couple of stitches. If your machine tends to like eat your fabric to begin with, I'm going to show you a way around that also. Because I know we're here to talk about templates, oops, my seam went up, so I'm going to raise up my foot. And if you can't get that to go back like that, you can use your curved tweezers to get underneath there and lay it back. And we're going to move on now, always having my needle stop down in my fabric, okay? And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to even this up using both of my fingers there and come clear to the end.
So the question from Kristen is, what else could you use fork pins for?
It's basically a quilting product so that you're matching up your seams. I got a thread here.
So that's really its only job.
That's really, I mean, you can do it in clothing too, but that's really its only job. So you can see what we have here. So I need back my pressing equipment. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this back on here. Got to get my ironing cord. So I'm going to lay this like so from the front, but I'm going to press from the back. And in this case, again, we're looking at this. Which way does it really want to go? Well, I really don't want my blue seam shadowing on behind my white fabric. So my seams that I just stitched, yep, and I can tell I forgot to do my setting. So hang on, guys. It always acts better when you set it. So I'm going to set that seam. You can see it even lays better. I'm doing the same thing here. Now, if I started to answer a question and I didn't answer it, let me know, because it seems like I started and then something else came up. But I am going to get back to showing you if your machine kind of wants to eat your fabric to begin with.
You were actually telling us about the template you were going to use later and why you're starting off with this.
Well, when I start off with this, it's well, great. I know where I was headed, because I know we're not in a class to learn about quilting techniques necessarily, but we need techniques that allow us an easier quilting experience. So that's why I'm taking the time today to show you some of this with like using a smaller rotary cutter and that kind of thing, because I want you to realize that things do not have to be clumsy. They don't have to be hard to deal with. So when I turn this over, I can see right here, and I'm glad that happened, you can see that little pleat pulling down. So what I'm going to do is press from the right side. And again, that's why I like the little iron, because I'm only on this seam. I'm not over there on that seam until I go in that direction, and that lays a whole lot better now. So that's just some tips on how you can put your blocks together in an easy manner. And I want to show you real quickly that cutting I was talking about on curves. So I've got my cutting board here, and I'm just going to take a piece of this corner right here that I'm going to stitch on here in a minute. And I'm going to show you if I was cutting a curve, like this is a curved template right here. If I had my great big cutter, it's not going to go around there very easily. But because I've got my small one, I can just put this right on that edge and cut right around there. And so I was just telling Megan I need to replace this blade in this one, but it looks like it got it good for me there. So it's much easier than if I had the great big 45 or 60 blade to be able to cut around a curve.
We've got one more question before you move on, I believe.
Okay.
Robin would like to know, which needle plate are you using? Because it looks like you're using a single hole plate.
I am not on this, although I do have one. I did not switch the needle plate. I could have. And if you have one that you can switch, you might want to do that when you're stitching straight stitch. This one actually, like I said, has one, but I just didn't use it.
Jay's got one as well. Can you show how to spin the center core on the seams out?
Yeah, you want to hand that back to me? Yes, I do. Okay. I don't need that. I need this. Okay. So when you spin these seams here, and there's, you know, I usually don't take the time to do this, okay? Because what happens is you end up with some stitches going one way and some going another, or not stitches, but the seam going one way and then another. So if you remember, I stitched these seams so that what I broke right there was where they were just continuing. So when you're spinning the seam, we have to take a few stitches out. It's been a long time since I've done this, so if I don't do it right, somebody can tell me what I've done wrong. Because I'm not getting that to stay like it's supposed to. What it would look like would be that, but these are supposed to be back over this way, so I will have to say I'm not sure how I spin them and keep them so that they're flat like this, because I don't want to take any more stitches out than I've taken out. Here we go.
Is this technique the same thing as a pinwheel?
Yeah.
Spin? Okay.
Yeah. So it ends up looking like this, but I thought you still had your seams laying down like that. So when I use 60 weight thread, I usually don't have a problem with that, so I don't take the time to do that. But I'll have to look that up and try and remember to show you that next week, because I know your seams still lay this way, but this kind of spins around that way. So I don't want to take any more stitches out because that would be an issue. Since they ask about that, I want just a couple of long pieces. I think there's even some over in your trash, Megan. I just need 2 long strips to stitch together. They can be the same or different. And I may have a strip of this fabric that I cut it only needs to be about 1 inch wide. I think it was right on top there. Just a piece of my red fabric.
I don't have any that are 1 inch wide.
Okay.
Hold on, I just found some. And look, they're red, white, or the red and blue.
No, I need strips.
Oh, there's no strips.
Okay. Well, I thought I had some strips. Maybe they're laying on the top. I need the little blue piece. So while she's getting that, I'm going to show you how to make a starting block. It's simple. This is about a 2 inch by 2 inch. I fold it over. I fold it like this. And so what you would do when you start to stitch is you would stitch on that starting block first and come to the very end of it, and then you would be able to add that in, the new fabric. So now, if it was going to eat my fabric, here's my 2 strips, and I'm going to stitch those together. And you can see, because of the fact that that starting block was there, it didn't let any of my fabric go down. Now, most of the newer machines, that's not going to happen as much, but the older machines, they really can tend to eat your fabric at the start. So that's why a starting block is a good thing to have. Now, the reason I went ahead and stitched this whole seam is because I want to show you a product that you may not be aware of. So when I'm finished, I would just cut that starting block off and I use it again and again and again. Now, let's say I did this and I had stitched them right sides together and I needed wrong sides together and I needed to take this out. An easy way to take this out is I'm going to start just a few stitches, and then I'm going to show you what's called a third hand. And this is something I've had for years and years and years, and we couldn't find them for a long, long time. So Megan, it's right over here. I hate for them to see my trash basket. I'm going to move it over here. So this I keep right beside my machine. I don't keep it in this spot. but I wanted you to be able to see it, so I moved it to this area. So this is what's called a third hand. And this hooks onto your table. It's just a clamp. And then at this end, there is a very strong little clamp. And so this is what you can do. I think I might be out of the vision here. But because that hooks on, you can just go right down here and rip out your seam. And it just makes it so much easier. It's like having an additional person to hold that. So if you've never had a third hand, I use them for a lot of other things. Like, for example, when I'm putting a cording in or something and I don't want what I'm using to go all the way, you know, or, I mean, I don't want it to go all the way in, I just hook that onto the one end and it won't go in. Now, obviously what I'm showing you here, I'm not able to pull that far back, but you can just keep on pulling that, working your way away from it, or just come up, snap it on again, and continue on down what you're doing. So a third hand really saves you some extra time.
April wanted to know on that starting block that you made, why did you fold it 4 times?
I like to have it a little bit thicker so that it really grabs onto the thread and holds. It's a stability thing. All right, good questions. Keep asking them.
We also had another one. The one to know, do you ever just start 1/8 of an inch in on your fabric?
No, because I want that beginning to be, when I'm doing a quilt, I want that beginning to be right at the edge. Now, the other thing you can do is stitch forward and then stitch back, but I really don't like to do any back stitching when I'm working on a quilt.
When you were using your third hand, Sandy wants to ask the question, doesn't that stretch your fabric?
No, that's really, I mean, you're not pulling that hard. So I'm going ahead and set up my machine here for stitching my template quilting.
If they want that third hand, where can they go to find that?
Well, you can check with your local quilt shop. Like I said, I just recently found it again, and I know it's on my website. If you go to All Things Quilting and Sewing with Donelle McAdams, you'll find it on there. All righty. So I've got my needle changed. I need to get back to my regular centered position. And I always want to make sure that I've got that in place. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of templates today. And one of them was on the handout. There is a handout, and it's on in three places. It's on Westalee by me. I hope it's on Sew Steady now. And the other Facebook page that it's on, actually 4 places. It's on All Things Quilting and Sewing with Donelle McAdams, and it's also on the SewBiz Marion website page. But the template that I'm going to show you how to use first is this one, and it's Circles on Quilts Wreath 1. And as we learned last week, it's kind of hard to find it, so I've put a link on my Facebook, or on my Sew Steady, or excuse me, I'll get it, on my SewBiz Marion page to that so that you can see it. But this one comes, this is an 11.5 inch at the top, and this is a 5.5 inch at the bottom. So you're going to get both of those with one purchase. And I'm not sure it comes in any other sizes. I didn't see any other on there today. And I will tell you, this is one that you need a 6-point crosshair square with. So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to get that 6-point, it's right there, and I'm going to set it underneath here. Actually, I need my other fabric, Megan. Might as well do it on a real project. So I'm going to set this on here. And I am going to be changing my thread because that was a piecing thread, and I want to use a regular weight thread, 40 or 50. And I'm going to use kind of a brighter color here so that you'll be able to see it. When you're threading your machine, it's not an option. You have to thread it with the foot up. So if you're doing quilting and you change your thread, you know that sometimes you forget to put that foot back up. But if you will just remember that whenever you're threading a machine, the foot needs to be up. That's the only way that the thread can get seated in the take-up. And so you need to thread with the needle up. Now I'm going to take this and pull it back and pull out this 60 weight thread here. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen these little things before, but this is a way that you can keep this bobbin with your spool. And they just look like little hairpins, but they're actually thread minders. I don't know exactly the name of it. But then all I have to do is stick this down into my spool, and I've got that connected right there with my 60 weight. So I know that that's the one and where it's supposed to go. But I need to get a regular weight thread, so I'm going to get down here and find my regular weight thread.
Tell us the name of the template you're going to use again.
It's called Circles on Quilts, Wreath number 1. I'm going to use a green bobbin because it's what I've got wound. It won't matter on the back there. And I'm just threading that into the machine. I always use 2 hands to do that, because it needs to go behind this. In this case, you probably have something similar, and around. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am going to center this pretty much by measuring corner to corner. And then I'm going to make my marks in 6 positions. So let's pull this in so you can see it. And those are the 6 lines that I need. Now, I can get up to 36 lines on this, and I could actually use 36 lines on this, but I certainly don't need them, and you'll see why. I like to have at least some. This happens to be a template that is going to be spinning on a thumbtack, so I'm going down through the center there. And I'm doing this a little slower because sometimes people miss what I'm doing. I'm taking that thumbtack out and I'm just turning it over, and I see the hole, and I'm putting it right back up through from the bottom so that now it's dead center, and there's my lines. So the template that I'm using is the Circles on Quilts Wreath 1.
And this is a Leone West template, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Oh yeah, well I'm only using Westalee templates. And what I'm doing to start with, you'll see there's a line right here, a line here, and a line up there. Now even though that doesn't extend up there, I can see that it's lined up. So here's an A, here's a B. There's an A1 here and a B1 here. Now, I didn't go ahead and put these on because I wanted to be able to show you them. And some of you know what I'm getting, and that's my ruler stickers. These are going to be the ones are where I finish each part of the design. So it doesn't matter whether they're red or green or blue or whatever color. I'm just going to make them green today, because when I'm doing one part of it, I stop at A1, and when I'm doing the other part, I stop at B1. So if you want to write this down, this is, I think, pretty true on any of our templates that have these letterings. If you start at A, you're going to be stopping at B1. If you start at B, you're going to be stopping at A1. Now watch what I'm talking about. So I've got this lined up. I'm going to put my foot, I better get my template quilting set up. So I'm setting that foot down and I'm coming right in here to A. I'm going to take my needle down, my needle up, and I'm going to pull up my thread. So I'm pulling that up like that. It wasn't long enough to get a hold of, so I need to go underneath there. Remember I told you it's green, which if I was really doing this for a project, I wouldn't leave that green, I would change it. So right here's where we're starting, and I'm going to stitch down to B and come back and stop at B1. So here we go, and I stop at B1. I move my template, and I'm going to turn it around here so you can see it. There's etchings on here, there and there, that will line up when I move it. So you could feasibly go all the way around and never have to realign with any of these lines. But I'm going to show you what happened to me today when I did that. When I got back around to start, here we are. I was that much off. That much off. Because I didn't have any lines to line up with. Now these lines that you see, this is because I used an 8-point, and an 8-point wasn't right. It needed to be a 6-point. So it would not have mattered because I wasn't using those lines. As soon as I found out I had the wrong points on there, I said, that's okay, I can still use the lines on the template. And so that's what happened to me. So what I'm going to do this time is a little bit of both. I'm using the lines on the template. This is right in there at B. Remember now, somebody shouted out from where you are. If I start at B, I'm going to stop at what? I heard that. It was A1. So that's what I'm going to do. So here we go. And I stop at A1. I move to the next one, and you can see this lines up with this side, and that right around there lines up with what I've already stitched. I'm starting at A, so I'm going to be stopping at B1. I slide over, I'm starting at B, so I stop at A1. Now some of you are going, how can you stop at A1 and then start at A? Because I slide it. I'm now at A. And the whole idea is every 6th one is going to line up. Okay? So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, it's not the 6th one because I started on, if I'd started over on the side, it would have been. But that way I can work with my lines as I go around there. So this is, I'm going to turn it upside down so you can see it. You can see this is right on top of that previous stitching. And so I can do it either way. This way at least you can see it. Uh-oh, my thread broke. I guess it didn't like me turning around.
Do you have time for a question while you're rethreading?
I certainly do.
April is sounds like she's new to all things template quilting because she would like to know what size crosshatch is best to buy for a first ruler.
Crosshair square. You can always go smaller and you can always go bigger. I think the smaller one is the one that's a little bit more convenient to use because you can always add those extra line, or you can always make the lines longer if you need to.
So should she get a 6-point or an 8-point?
8-point. Start with an 8-point because the 8-point is the one that more than probably half of the templates are based on. Some of them it does not matter. Some of them it doesn't matter at all. Now, if you were in my shoes here, what I just did, I could see right back there after I got clear up here that that's kind of fuzzy. So what I would probably do would be to take all of this out to right there and tie that, bury my threads, and then start there and move on. Now everybody always asks me how I do that, so why don't I just real quickly show you, because that way it will be more of an experience than me just telling you. Now this is one of those threads that you want to make sure that you get under all of it, because as you can see, it kind of frays out a little bit. Now that doesn't matter because I can still tie that, but I'm going to just take this and I'm going to be pulling these stitches out. I don't even remember if it just broke and I cut it or it just broke and I didn't cut it. We'll find out here real quickly. And sometimes this is why it's good to have a different color on the back, because you can kind of see what you're doing. So now would be a time to ask a few questions if you want to. I know you learn from my mistakes, at least I hope you do, because those are the kind of things that you encounter. Somewhere along the line you will encounter those. And this is a good thing to remember to tell you, you know, if you're stitching and you're getting real teeny tiny stitches, you probably wouldn't be able to take those out, so it's a good thing to work with trying to get a little bit larger stitch. And those of you that have been with me for a long time know that I turn my foot control around to the back and set my machine to a medium speed.
We got a question for you. A couple of them have asked, what tool did you use for your reference lines? That
These
marker
lines right here?
The marker.
Oh, that is a Choco marker that I emptied out the chalk from it and refilled it with Pounce iron off chalk. And so when I'm finished, that will actually all iron off. Now, I'm getting to the point where I'm at the very last stitch here and it's not liking it, so I'm just going to cut that thread there because it has frayed a bit. And now I'm going to flip this over to the back and show you exactly what I would do, because that's sometimes what needs to be shown. So I'm going to pull this thread here. There's my yellow thread. That's the piece that I cut off. And then I'm going to pull up on this, and if I can see the yellow, I'll pull it through. If not, I'm going to get my hand needle and pull that through. So it looks like I need to get my hand needle, and I'm using the cinch side threading needles, and the advantage of that is I just don't have to thread it. I just pull it in, and I'm going to put that right straight down where it came up from. And my thread was so short I didn't get a hold of it. So you can see I pulled that through. I've got both of my threads right here, and I'm simply going to knot them. That gold is so light I couldn't see it. There we go. So now I've tied that knot, and I can take the threads and put them in the side here, and then I'm just going to take them both and put them right underneath the layers and into the batting and pull it through, and then I'll just simply cut that thread off. I pull my fabric up just a little bit, and so now I've got it knotted, I've got it secured. And now I can just go back and start right at that very point. Get my template on there. I'm coming in here. I'm going to put my foot down, my needle down, and bring my thread up just like I did when I started. Only this time my thread's long, so I can just pull that out, back down, needle down, and we're ready to go. I'm lined up here. This line's lining up there. So ask questions.
There have been some that want to know if they only have the 8-point grid, can they still use that for this template?
You wouldn't use it because if you'll show them that other one that I did today, nothing lines up with it. That's what I found. So nothing lines up with it.
Could they maneuver it so they only had 6 lines?
No.
Okay.
And I guess I'm wrong because this one is not lining up with that either. So the 6-point, we'll see what I get done. Maybe it's the 5-point I need. I don't know. But I know that here's the deal. I know now, I didn't know this morning when I was using it, but I know now that when I get to the last 2 or 3, to be paying attention to where they are, because I could have, let's just say, fudged, because that's not even hardly a 1/4 of an inch difference of where that was to meet up. So that's why these have all these lines on them, so that you can do them without it. I'm just kind of confused because I thought this was the 6, and it broke again. Well, I'm going to show you that one again, and I'm not going to worry about not getting this one done because I've got something else I want to show you. But you can see what this is looking like, and we got about halfway on each of those, and it's probably a little bit too large of a needle for that particular thread. But you can see what this looks like. I think you're going to be able to see it better. I'm just going to cut this thread off here. But I think you're going to be able to see it better on the one from today that I did. So before I lose this thumbtack someplace, let me take that out. And here's what this one looked like. So right here, you can see that's only a 1/4 of an inch that it didn't come. So if I was coming around, this is where I started, this is where I finished. On these last few, I could have just kind of swung it over and pushed it a little bit farther each time, and I could have gotten that taken up very easily. So if this was in here like this, when I was doing this one, I would have just kind of pushed that a little bit. And you can see it's just a little farther right there. And then I would have done that one, and I would have come to this one, and where that's lined up there, I would have just pushed it a little bit. And then when I got to the last one, this is what you would be doing. You would be looking at this and saying, well, if I'm going to get back to that being the spot where a needle goes, then I got to measure my 1/4 of an inch. And you can get it back there. So if I have time at the end, I'll finish the one where it broke, but I want to show you this next technique because I think you're going to really like it. So we're going to pretend we have this beautiful wreath all the way around there. And what I'm going to show you is how you can finish this in an easier way. So those of you that are beginners, or some of you that are just like, I'm tired of doing binding or whatever, it would just make it an easier way to finish. So what I'm going to do is on the top and the bottom, it doesn't matter, it's just 2 sides, I am going to take a 3 1/4 inch strip, and I've already pressed mine in half, right sides out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the raw edge against the raw edge here. And again, just a few clips to hold everything in place. And we're going to stitch a 1/4 of an inch away. Now, you can measure that, or you can just make this long enough that it's going to go, and then you can cut it off when you get it on there. It doesn't really matter. But I'm going to go back to my straight stitch. And I'm going to change that foot back. So that I can have my 1/4 of an inch foot on there. Actually, I think what I want to use is my foot that has a guide on the side. This foot is the O foot, and it has, for the machine I'm using, and it has a guide on the side, so that I can put that on the opposite side. So if you can see my needle moving now, I'm moving it over so I will get to my 1/4 inch. And so when I set this down now, when I get ready to stitch, I have this guide on the side that's going to hold that right in the right place. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on, and I am going to set that right up against that edge there. I'm going to start on a little ways. Get my regular weight of sewing thread back on. I will tell you, when you start getting extra different types and weights of thread, it's a good idea to keep them separated so that you don't get them mixed up. If not, make sure you take some permanent marker and mark somewhere on them so that you will be able to know what weight and what they were there for. Alrighty, so I'm going to set this thread or this foot down. It's right along that edge, and I'm going to stitch a few stitches forward, and I'm going to back stitch to where the edge of it is, and I'm going to pivot. Now I want, when I finish this, I want to have a nice crisp point. So I'm not going to sew clear down to within 1/4 inch, and I have lines on the side of my foot that tell me where that is. I'm going to stop about a stitch ahead of that, and I'm going to raise my presser foot, my needle's still down, and I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to set that back down, and I'm going to go like 2 stitches. 1, 2. And then I'm going to lift that foot up and pivot the rest of the way, and you'll see I'm back lined up with my edge. And that way, when I cut across there and I actually turn it, it is going to be a good crisp turn. So if you want to have a good point, you kind of go at a diagonal. And that works on anything when you're doing placemats or whatever, anything like that. Now, even though I've cut these the same length, you can see this one is just going to be a little bit longer. And I have 2 options. I can take time and cut it off now, which is what I'm going to do. Or I could just go ahead and sew it from the bottom part of that. I just think it's easier to cut off now. So now they're the same.
Rebecca has a question. Could you use the Westalee ruler instead of changing your foot?
You can. I don't think it's as easy to do, but you certainly can. I'm coming up to here, and I'm going to back stitch so that I've got that in place. I'm just going to cut that. So now I've got this little bit of a lip down here on both sides. I'm going to do the same thing up at the top. Remember, this piece was a 3 1/4, and I simply pressed it in half right side out. Now you see what I'm doing down here is I'm just getting this edge out because this is the side we actually didn't finish, and so it's kind of moved in a little bit. Just cutting that batting off there a little. So foot down and stitch a few forward, back to that edge, come back forward and stop before you get to the 1/4 inch. Go a couple of stitches across at a diagonal. Uh-oh, I got 3 instead of 2. We'll see how that does. Might have to, nope, that's okay. I was going to say otherwise we might have to back up. This one's off about the same as the other one was, so I'm just going to cut that off of there. I guess I cut it, but I didn't get the start of it. There we go. Sorry about that. Stop a few stitches ahead. Add a diagonal. 1, 2. Oh, I'm going back on one this one time because I know I went too far. There we go. And we're going to back stitch. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut those threads, and this time I'm going to put these two on, but we don't do this like this little lip right here. So what I'm going to do is, and forgive me, I'm using a little bit of the selvage because otherwise I was going to have to cut a whole new piece of fabric. But all I'm going to do with this one is come in about a 1/2 inch so I don't have all that bulk in there. You can still see there's an overlap here. And I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch away. You'll never see that selvage. And I will tell you, I cut off the bottom of the selvage. So this is not, that will make it so if ever really had to do that, it's not going to be as big a problem. It's not going to be a problem at all because the color's not going to show, but it's also not going to pull in because the edge that was the finished edge is cut off. And that's just something that you'll learn as you go through many years of sewing. So I'm going to need my iron here in a minute, Megan. I'm going to back up here, cut this thread, turn this around, come in about a 1/2 inch. If you've never used one of your feet that has a guide on it, I'd encourage you to get one out. It's so nice to be able to have that. Cut it off so it's about a 1/2 inch different.
Margie's never seen this done before, so I think she's excited about the technique.
Well, it's one of those that really, if you're in a pinch and you need to do something a little bit faster, you can do this. And it's also a great starter one for beginners. So what we're going to do now is we're going to come down here. I'm going to put this back over here. And in this inside here, on the one that's on the outside here, the two that we just stitched on, I'm going to press those first. So I'm just going to press that out. Now I will tell you that I like to use starch on this. So I've got my starch there handy. And I don't want to put the starch on my wool mat, so I'm just going to take it and go this way so it doesn't end up on my wool mat. And I'm going to starch that because I want this to be a good clean turn. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then I'm going to give that a little bit of a starch. I use Starch Savvy by June Taylor. You can use Best Press, whatever you want to use. And then we're going to flip this to the back, and we're going to turn that so that the whole thing is turned. So I'm just working my way along there. And for those of you that have been sewing a while, you probably know what it means to roll a seam, and that's what I'm doing here so that the seam itself is right on the edge. You're not going to see it on the front.
Now earlier you talked about setting the seams. Would you still set these seams?
This one doesn't really matter because of all those threads. It's not going down through there. So you can see what this looks like on this side. It's a finished edge. I'm going to show you how I would stitch this because you've got a couple of options with it. But I need to show you the other side too.
And Sandy's got a question. Why did you press and then starch? Was it somehow to warm the fabric for the starch, or?
No, I just like to get it where it's supposed to be and then give it the starch. It's just something that I've always done when I'm doing that, this type of a technique. There's a lot of layers of fabric there, and once you convince them where to go, it's kind of like separating a step into two steps, because this, you can see all this, but this is going to lay back this way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, not probably going to be able to starch this until after I turn it, and I can't get clear into the corners, but I'm going to do what I can do right there, and then I'm going to take my point turner, and I'm actually going to hold, this is the way a point turner is designed to be used. You can hold it right in that spot and then flip your fabric back that way and then go back in there. And it's kind of like, remember, oops, one step down now, I'm just really messing it. So I'm going to trim this off first. And again, I'm going to push that through. I'm going to lay it on the back and flip this over it and then push that on through. But you want to make sure you're using something that's not going to push the point right out. But you can see, because we went at those diagonals, you get a really nice point. And so this is one of the corners. I want to come down here and do the same thing. You can see my diagonal stitching across there.
Kathy asked the question, do you ever top stitch to the facing before you turn?
You could. It's an extra step that you really don't have to do. So what I've done here, I will then take this and do my pressing. You could starch that if you want. It's just kind of nice to have two sides definitely done that way. And so this is what your corners are going to look like. This is that raw edge, but it's down underneath there. And then we'll come over to this side. This one was all pressed before, but I haven't pressed this corner. So I'm going to come into here and press just that corner edge and come on down to back where we were in the middle. So now you can see that from the front, it's just a finished. You've got your edges all finished, but you don't have binding. So you might have a project you're doing that you just want the front to be seen, but you want the edges to be finished. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a different color, probably a white thread, and I'm going to show you how I would stitch this, even though it's not all laying flat. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to put one of my clips there so it holds in place. I'm going to push that back in where it's supposed to be. Use a couple of our straight pins and then get this like that. And the reason I'm taking the time to show you hand stitching is there are easy ways to hand stitch so that the stitching doesn't show. And it will make it easier to show you with a thread that's going to be visible so that you can see what I'm doing. Questions?
No, I think we just got a mad face, and I don't know if that person was just mad at the hand stitching idea, because that's me. I am not a hand stitcher.
Well, let me tell you, I can see this being done too with stitching on this. You could actually stitch if it wasn't going to interrupt your design. because then it would just look like it was a flange. So you definitely could. I totally understand. Hand stitching and I are not the best friends either. So you want to I like to use like a milliner's needle. You want to make sure that you've got a needle that is one that, well, first of all, you got to thread it, which I've been using side threading needles for so long here. I don't even know if I can thread this.
Are you going to tell them your tip on how to thread the needle?
Oh, yeah, I should do that. The easy way to thread a needle is to put the eye in your mouth so there's saliva in the eye. Cut the point at an angle, cut the thread tip at an angle, and then when you get right up to that eye, because the saliva's in there, it pulls it in just like it was magic. Now, because I was a home ec teacher, I have to tell you, first of all, my mother never sewed, okay? If any problem was to be solved, it would be with a safety pin. That's all she knew how to do, that or maybe some duct tape. But that's not against her. She had other skills and talents, but sewing was not one. So whenever I saw her thread a needle, it was scary, but she did what they called the spit and wrap knot, where you took the ends and you kind of wrapped it, and it was just nasty. So I'm going to show you how you can make a clean knot. You're going to take the tail, because we only want to use one thread to do this stitching. You're going to take the tail and lay it like this on your finger, and then you're just going to take the needle so that it's just like an X. And then you just take the end of this and wrap it around about 3 times. Hold your fingers together and you shoot this like a rocket through there. And if you slowly pull that, you don't want to get this to causing an issue, you will end up with a really nice knot that's not nasty. So can we see that knot there?
And there you go.
You got a good knot. So that's a tip that if we have time at the end and you want to see it again, I'll show you. But I just cut it off so that there's just a little bit. I guess I got to get it over here somewhere.
It's so little the camera can't focus in on it.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I am going to start here and just stitch that way. It won't matter whichever, but I want to catch all this. So Megan, if you want to get closer with that camera, you can do whatever, so that I can show them how this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come underneath here and I am going to bring this up in the fold. So I'm not coming out the front, I'm coming up in the fold. So you can see it came right out that fold there. So now that knot is going to go underneath that fabric. So here it is, it's going underneath that fabric. Now when I stitch this, I want to get this good and in place. I'm going to get one more straight pin here and put it right along the side so that it holds it while I show you how to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to come behind where this came out of that fold, and we're just going to take the thread and go right underneath and go about maybe 3/8 of an inch at the very most and come out in that fold again. And when I pull this through, it's a single thread. It's gotten caught over here on some others, which is not unlikely. And so when I pull that through, I've got a stitch right here, but you can't see it. So that came out of the fold there. I'm going underneath and coming over and coming out that fold about 3/8 of an inch away and pulling that thread. And see, you can't even see it even though it's a white thread. So this is in the fold. I go underneath and I come back out about 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 over, and I pull that, and I want you to see the last time before I pull it through. You can see it right there, that little white. When I pull it, you can't even see it even though it's white. Again, underneath, up in that little fold. I can take that pin out because it's not doing anything now. And just because those are catching, I'm just going to pull it. There's my stitch. Give it a little tug, and you can't see it. And so this is a pretty quick, for those of you that don't like hand sewing, I don't like it either. It goes rather quickly, but it's also very nice and hidden. And this is actually the way I do my hand stitching when I'm doing add-on binding, is the very same thing. So I'm going underneath and catching fabric, coming out in the fold. Took me a couple times there to get right in the edge of that fold, and you're going to be able to have a nice hidden stitching so that you can't see it on there. And I think you would agree with me, this is matching this. I mean, it's the same fabric, and it's really, you know, hard to even tell that there's an extra edge on that, but this is called the facing method. So you're actually finishing up a project. It's going to look finished on this side. On this side it still looks finished, but because you have used a way of doing a blind hand stitch, you're not going to be able to see that. So any questions?
Are you using just one thread, or is it doubled up in that?
No, it is just one thread. Just one thread.
So how about you give us some, if you like this method and have never used it, give us some thumbs up. If you have used it, give us some hearts. Let's see who's out there and who's done what with this.
So you can see once I get going on this, it goes rather quickly because it's just a matter of going right behind where you were, coming out in the fold. And right there, it looks like it is 2 threads. I'm just going to pull it so that that other one comes through.
We got a lot of you who have never tried this method. That's exciting.
Well, good. I'm glad I shared it today then, because I will tell you, like I said, there are some times when this is even a better method for the fact that you don't want that extra binding on there, and yet it finishes off your project. But you can see, because I've got quilt batting in there, I don't have to worry about coming out the front. And it's just a matter of how you hold your fabric. You can see I got my thumb there right where I want it to be. And then I just move it over. And you can just zip right along there.
And tell us again, what was the measurement of this binding that you added on?
3 1/4 inches. So I just had 3 1/4. You could probably get by with 3. If you wanted 3 1/2, you could probably do that too. So since I've shown you that stitching, I'm going to show, well, let me show you how I would tie it off. So if I'm back to the beginning of where I want to finish, I would take this and I would come up with my last stitch, like so, and then I would just take this and kind of pull it back a little bit so I got underneath there, and then before I pull it through, I'm going to go through my loop. So this is actually, as you see it right here, making a knot. And so that's 1 knot. I'm going to do the same thing again. Again, I've pulled that back just a little bit so that it's kind of underneath. If it was the same color, you wouldn't see it. I go through that loop. You can see it's in a loop, and there's a knot. And 2 is usually enough. And then I simply take the, right where I did that stitching, I just go underneath everything and hide that thread. Pull it out somewhere down the way a little bit, and you can see if that was the red that we needed, that's all you would see there, and you're hiding that tail just like we do when we secure it. And so that is completely finished and okay and ready to be done. So before I get rid of the thread and my needle, I'm going to show you how I did that knot again, because I'm sure there's some that would like to see that. So I've threaded this. Let's just do the whole threading, Megan. So I put the needle eye in my mouth, cut the thread at a diagonal, and then when I put this up against there, it just goes in because it was in my mouth and there's saliva in there. So we've been doing it wrong for years. We've been wetting the thread. So then to tie this, I'm going to take it so it's made like an X. So the short end is in my towards my palm of my hand. I make this like an X. I go around about 3 times. And then I put all of that between my fingers and just shoot that needle. And you can tell I taught middle school because I taught them to shoot that up just like it was a rocket. Pull slowly, and then you will get that nice, neat knot there. It's going to be one that's going to hold very well, and it's also going to be so that it's not just a nasty old wad of thread. But only use one layer. Right now, as you're working, you would be coming up, and as we stitched all of that in, we would just pull our thread a little bit farther, and we would just keep doing that. Would I take the same thread all the way around? No, that's too much thread to work with. I would probably do this in 2 pieces of thread. But when you're doing this nice stitch, real nice and neat like I showed you, it's not going to show. You're going to be able to tie it off and move on. So that's the flanged edge finish. And there's the corner that's done. And you can see how nice that looks. So I hope I've taught you a few new things today. I wish I hadn't broken my thread and we'd have gone all the way around there. I'm not certain why that one didn't, but I'm going to find out for you and tell you next week why it didn't line up exactly. But that is Circles on Quilts wreath number 1. Don't forget about that third hand tool. That's one that's very fun to use too. And if you have any other questions, there's multiple ways you can get a hold of me. So thanks for joining us today. Any questions before I stop?
The weight of thread you used for that?
I used a 40 weight thread, 40 or 50, just regular kind of an all-purpose thread. Any others?
Nope.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Saturday. Bye now.